Well, welcome everybody to this latest in our little series of explorations into agility in its various guises in various organizations and organizational functions. And today we're looking at agile procurement, and I have to say, privileged actually to have with us two of probably the foremost thinkers in agile procurement, Mirko Kleiner of Lead Agile Procurement and David Kershaw, who is a specialist in agile procurement. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you.
Thank you, John.
We have about...
Thanks, John, for having me.
It's my great pleasure, my great pleasure. We have about 25 or 30 minutes just to chat about procurement and the impact of agile behaviors on the procurement process. And David, if I can come to you first, if I may. Procurement is often thought of as a long-term process or function. And of course, agility is something that is often equally thought of as something that happens in set phases. How do you think agile procurement translates to managing that end-to-end process of procurement?
Yeah, okay, John, thanks for that question. I suppose the first thing I'd want to do straight away is separate your questionnaire into process and function. First of all, procurement is a function. It's a very important function. We're only seeing now the importance that procurement supply chain colleagues are playing in the global problem with coronavirus. You know, lots and lots of organizations are relying on their supply chain and procurement colleagues to buy things. And it's quite interesting that the procurement function now is being viewed as a secondary support service to health services, food provision, and we'll see soon into construction and other areas. In terms of process, without a doubt, you know, procurement is very long. Mirko and I have spent quite a few years talking about this in different places, actually, and different organizations around the world, talking about how long the process really does take. Now, you know, procurement is about buying things, acquiring things, and we have to make sure when we're spending other people's money, be it the public sector, the taxpayers' money, or be it people who own companies or shareholders, that we are doing the things in the right way. But I think for years now, procurement has not modernized, and it hasn't actually come up with new ways of working. And sort of, it is about time that procurement organizations and those functions start applying the agile ways of working to make sure the processes within procurement are much more leaner and much more reactive to what the internal client, the user of a procurement service, actually needs.
Right, now it's interesting because the point about procurement being a long-term process from end to end is quite an important one, because I guess if we think about agility as being the power to adapt and to in response to change over any long-term process, some changes are going to happen. And I guess, as you quite rightly say, the current situation with the coronavirus pandemic has enforced huge amounts of change and unthought of amounts of change very rapidly on organizations, and the NHS is a very good example of that. And as you say, the food distribution network, and later on construction. Do you think, and Mirko, you might want to respond to this, do you think that whilst the coronavirus situation is exceptional, nevertheless in the future change will increasingly be a rapid adaptation requirement of the procurement function? And do you think that agile processes or agile behaviors are the response to that?
I'm a strong believer to that, to be honest. And it's so funny because, you know, if you observe traditional organizations in the current crisis or any crisis from the past, they start to react and act and behave like agile teams. And we have funny names for that, like task forces. They're empowered, cross-functional, the best people we have in the organization solve the problem, sometimes overnight. And on the other hand, if there is no crisis, we have this long-lasting transactional process, which is weird, right? And with Agile, I think with Lean Agile Procurement in particular, we demand the same major upgrade, let's say,
Yep.
for the procurement process, but also for the professionals in their behaviors, in their way of working, and they appreciate that a lot. On the other hand, I would like to emphasize with the procurement people, because the governance is not often not set by the procurement people. They just have to act like this,
Right.
as we have governances in IT and in all the other functions. And we also have to say that the procurement process for sourcing, in a lot of cases, if you're sourcing the masks now, right, if that's digitalized, the process makes totally sense. But if it comes to uncertainty, if it comes to surprises, if it comes to today we need that, tomorrow we need something else, or something in addition to that, then a process is in our way, let's say. Yeah.
Now that's very interesting, yeah, because what that tells me is that if we call it in the good times, where there are no unexpected high impact changes hitting either one-off or regularly, in those good, in inverted commas, times, the procurement function, and indeed the procurement processes, develop habits which actually are quite elongated, because there's nothing there to step in and push those habits off the rails. Then when we get a change, a big change especially, those habits may not be flexible enough to be able to respond. So am I right in thinking that the agile approach to procurement is one that allows for that flexibility, even where there are habits which perfectly function well in normal times, still able to actually respond in the event of a sudden change or crisis? Is that the approach that agile procurement would take?
If you don't mind, I'll take this, John, just for a
Sure.
second, because
Yeah.
what my movement is about is applying all the agile ways of working to the complete commercial end-to-end life cycle. So
Right.
that's from looking backwards at your spend and looking at trends.
Yep.
So your category management approach, to the way you talk to the market, the way you talk to the industry, and they're slightly different there. The market is those who can supply, and the industry are those, is the wider context to potential innovators, academics, researchers. Then you move through to the document creation.
Yep.
Then you move through to the actual procurement process, which Mirko is doing some fabulous work in. I'm sure he'll tell you more about that in a second. Then we look at contracting, and then the most important bit for me is delivery. I call it contract management because I'm a procurement person, but ultimately it's about delivery. Now, all those bits, as a public sector procurement professional, I can flex on everything apart from the tendering bit, which most people would call procurement.
Yep.
Now, what I try and do is try and tell people that speak to your market regularly, make documentation easy, clear, simple. Speak to all the people that can help you understand how to fulfill the thing you're trying to fulfill. When it comes to the procurement tendering bit, is the bit where, as I say, as a public sector procurement person, that's the process I have to really follow very, very precisely. I'm not saying it shouldn't be challenged. It should be, of course it should. What Mirko has created, him and the team at Flowdays have created this great model, Lean Agile Procurement, where they do the tendering process. There's a lot of work they do up front. They do the tendering process very quickly. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Mirko to explain this a bit and the benefits of how he's explained things to me before, how he can turn something around quite quickly.
Yeah, Mirko, please do let us hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, David. So I think we have the similar aims. So with Agile, we always think end to end, from vision to value delivered. And we just took the idea of a DevOps team to the next level, right? So in the early days, we had a quality assurance function. And then we had a before delivery, and then after delivery, we had an operation function. And this now is everything in one cross-functional team. Now with Lean Agile Procurement or with Agile principles, it just makes sense to have the business in the driver's seat from idea till value delivered, supported by a cross-functional team. And very often in our days, we miss capabilities, we miss side products that supports or extends our product. So we have a big need to source something or someone or strategic partners. And we just filled this gap with Lean Agile Procurement. So no new ideas from an Agile point of view. We just put the puzzle together. And we started with a very simple but powerful idea. What if we have to find a new partner in just one day, right? And for procurement people and often business people, this is like, that's not possible. It takes us ages, right, just to get the documents right and talk to all the stakeholders and so on, and then get the final decision and so on. So what we do, just take this idea, and it's very simplified, but the framework is much beyond that. But if we have to decide within one day, we need to have decision takers there. We need to have the business there. We need to have all the cross-functional experts there. We need to have the users or our customers' representatives there. And we need to have the shortlisted partners or potential partners, you might call them suppliers there, which help us to find the right solution that fits everyone. So what we do, we recently sourced a new ERP system, just to give you an example, in 2 days. So there was a preparation time to break down the vision and the strategic objectives and so on, set up a cross-functional product delivery team. So it's development and delivery. And there was a lawyer in the team. There was procurement in the team. There was IT in the team. And it was driven by finance as the product owner. And by the way, the whole governance, we were still compliant because there was a procurement person in the team, which had in mind all the steps they need to fulfill, all the documentations they need to have to be compliant. The same for the IT guy and so forth. So we run through all these processes we currently have, but as a team. And so during that 2 days with the suppliers, by the way, competitors, we had them simultaneously in one room, we co-created not just the solution for this context, we co-created the contract with the 3 competitors. And sometimes there are weird situations pop up. Nobody has an idea of that or could plan that. So for example, it turned out that the licensing model of this ERP solution is the most complex thing. So we immediately told the 3 competitors, could you please for the next 15 minutes forget about that you are competitors and work it out together? And they did. After 15 minutes, they were done, right? So it's just the power of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really, really interesting because if we think about the word you mentioned before, Mirko, which is compliance, David, one of the biggest challenges of not being able to change that tendering or that procurement process is it needs to be compliant. And of course, that's a rigidity that we cannot get over, except that if we can get everybody, as Mirko has just outlined, get everybody in one place at the same time to talk around all the things that need to be compliant, just accelerated. And I think that idea of doing this long-term tendering process in the space of a day or two is possible because of an agile mindset, which says, actually, if we get everybody in the room at the same time, we can probably do this. And does that mean, first of all, that's tremendous because all of the time that can be removed, all of the delay that can be removed from the rest of the procurement process outside tendering can be done by the application of agile behaviors, which is great. We apply agile behaviors to the tendering process, mash it into a very small and effective time window. Does that mean that there is two things, I guess, an opportunity and a requirement? There's an opportunity to do that with almost any procurement exercise, because if it works with one, and particularly if it will work in the public sector, then it will probably work in most places. Is there at the same time a requirement for all of those other players, and that lovely word co-creation that you mentioned earlier on, for all of the other players, not just to be willing, actually to be capable, to be educated, to understand the way that agile behaviors work, because it's very difficult to expect people to behave in a competently agile way unless they know what that actually means. So is there a big training requirement there, do you think?
Well, it's really quite hard to apply that one-day turnaround or anything less than 2 or 3 weeks to public sector procurement globally.
Right.
It's not just the UK. It's
Yep.
not just European Union. It's globally. The public sector will require a period between 10 and 40 days where you follow a process. Now,
Okay.
what I do is I take all those great things that Mirko does in a few days and I apply those pre-procurement. So we've had experience of doing design jams where we've got all the legal people involved in making a contract. Instead of having complaints and problems during the contract delivery, pre-contract, pre-procurement, we get the business, all those people Mirko mentioned, the business, legal, etc., in one room, and we say, look, for this procurement, it's really difficult, or we're specializing in digital, right? Let's look at digital procurement. We've got a pipeline of, say, 30 digital products to go on. Let's make a tender suite of documentation fit for that category. We spend a bit of time co-creating those documents, making them simple, making them clearer, making them plain language, making them appropriate, allowing to contract through agile methodologies. So you can actually contract through sprints and contract based on MVP. Actually, I'm being a bit silly here, but what about minimum viable governance? Let's put that in the contract. All right.
Yeah, minimum viable everything.
Yeah, get that in the contract. Also, to the points Mirko made, multidisciplinary team, 100%, but also multi-vendor delivery. Let's put all that in the tender documentation before. So when we do follow the 10 or 20-day minimum period we have to apply, everyone knows what they're doing. Bidders will only apply if they're genuinely interested and genuinely can deliver that thing. It saves lots of clarification questions, which keep me as a public sector procurement person very busy during the tender period, and often makes it longer even still. And then when we pop out at the end of the tender process, it lowers the likelihood of legal challenge, which again normally extends the procurement process. So what Mirko and I have been doing for quite some years now, been learning from each other. We've been Mirko pushes me every time to be agile, and I sort of say you have to consider these public sector provisions, and we work together. And what Mirko does in his lean agile procurement model is great, and I take everything I can from that and apply it to the public sector, as well as using all the other agile ways of working and methodologies. The biggest thing for me though is to tell procurement people, don't sit on a separate floor in a separate office. Go and sit with your user. Go and sit with your client, your customer, whatever you call it. Go and sit with those people. Learn about the thing they need. Learn about how they do, and actually understand their cadence of their delivery.
That's interesting, because that the community that we're building up there, and we've got all of the technical people who are involved with a procurement process or the function itself. We've got finance, of course, we've got legal, we've got risk, we've got all of those other people who are wrapped around the compliance agenda. And the key here very clearly is to have a mindset that says we're going to co-create the solution to this. And everybody being accepting of that at the front end, co-locate where possible, because that, of course, will make a big difference. And then maybe the key word, simplify. Simplify this process, because procurement, and you know, I operate only on the very fringes of the procurement process. Even from my perspective, it's a complex one, and simplification would be a huge benefit, I think, to most procurement.
We worked on a project some years ago, and we reduced the standard government invitation to tender pack. We reduced it by 53% in volume. We reduced it from 12 documents down to 6.
Yep.
Just by, I think we saved 112 A4 pages.
Yeah.
And if you then map that into reading time,
Yep.
small to medium enterprise organizations, lowering the barriers of entry, and making sure people can quickly decide if they want to bid for something, and then quickly decide if they want to actually put in special terms, etc. It's really worth doing. And also, just on the minimum viable governance thing, if you're part of the multidisciplinary team that live and breathe the team you're working in and live and breathe the products you're trying to deliver, you shouldn't have to wait a month to go to your governance in a different part of the country. You're doing the governance daily.
Yeah, I would like to add something. And this minimum viable bureaucracy, as I call it, we need to ask ourselves why we need so much documentation in a complex space where everything changes on a daily basis. And to be honest, we ask ourselves that very much, and we have discussions with David about that as well. It's about risk, right? Managing risk. And so it's, on one hand, you could say it's a safe-ass politic, right? So we write it down and we stick to that, and we need to get that and just that, and then we are fine. But if we live and breathe, as David just mentioned, agile values, then we put trust as one of the values in front, and then we have totally different discussions during the vendor workshop with the three competitors. We, for example, do not ask them, can you give us a 10% discount or something, price pressure. We ask them, for example, why is your price that high? What risk do the others don't see?
Yep.
Right, stuff like that. Right, and it's funny, because out of that more honest, I don't call it negotiation, it's more a conversation. We got so much, rid of the assumptions, as David mentioned, because if you look at a traditional proposal, there's one page with deliverables and estimations, and 10 pages of assumptions and risks and save-as papers, right? So what we do with collaboration, we are looking on one hand for innovation, the ideas from the vendors, but also to get rid of all these assumptions and risks and have an alignment together for it. And I think, our numbers, we have a potential of 80% savings just by not doing the nice to haves and stuff that are not important or wrong assumptions. So that then, in addition to that, we have in average 400 to 800% improved time to market. Now, just imagine, it's not Mickey Mouse here what we are talking about. So for the public sector, having a tender in 2-3 weeks, or let's say a month, I would wish, being in such a tender years back as a software vendor, it's horrible, right? So that's so much opportunity costs, not just for the suppliers, but also for the business themselves. If they couldn't start earlier with delivering value to their market and customer.
Absolutely right, and I remember I worked for quite a while in the oil and gas sector, and I remember one of the guys there saying to me, the problem with the oil and gas sector, and it's not alone, construction is very similar, aerospace, defense, very similar. He said every time we do a project, we do it as though we've never done a project before. Everybody has to fill in a PQQ. Everybody has to jump through all of the same hoops on every single project. And I think that what excites me about this idea of agile procurement is, David, your point about let's look at the pre-project stage and start thinking agile from there. And of course, one of the elements of an agile approach would be, have we already done this? Well, yeah, if we have, then there are some things we don't need to do. And it might be the case that we set up maybe there's a list of potential suppliers who, once they've jumped through the hoops for one project, don't have to jump through the same hoops for similar projects for the next 2 or 3 years. That would immediately cut time and cost out of a procurement process. So this idea of trusting the individuals and the organizations who are part of that community, bring them all together at a pre-project stage if you can, but certainly in the tendering stage if not. And then the question that you asked, Mirko, which is really, really enlightening, when you said, why is your price so high? What is the risk that the rest of us can't see? And I think that's a question that says, we trust you, just tell us. And I think that willingness to be trusting in the way that we talk and question the other parties to this will elicit trust in return. And I think that is a tremendously powerful instrument to use in those conversations. So I can see how that process at the procurement conversation stage, allied with the long-term agile thinking, David, that you talked about, the end-to-end approach, would make a significant difference to the effectiveness and efficiency of the whole process, actually.
The key to this, John, is to actually think, so procurement is just the getting of stuff to help you deliver a project. Yep. And that project delivery is going to be much longer than just the procurement bit.
Right.
The key to all of this is to start at the end. Say, right, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to buy, build, create? What's the thing you're trying to do? How are we going to manage delivery of that? Is it going to be one vendor, one supplier? Yes, no. Is it going to be multiple suppliers? Do you need them to work together? Of course you do, right? Collaboration. You don't want them working. I've been in so many organizations where you're paying millions for these professional organizations and they don't even talk. Anyway, that's just a personal issue I have. I see it in lots of organizations. But you need to work on what you're trying to deliver first and work all the way backwards from there. So when you go out to market, you say to your bidders, we expect you to work with your competitors because we're paying you vast sums of money to do this thing. So as I say, work on your delivery methodology first, work out what is deemed accepted. You've also got to think about exit as well. We have a huge thing in procurement called let and forget mentality. We spend so much time and effort about letting the contract, procurement, signing the contract, and we just forget about it. And that's when the audit people or the savings people come in and say, hang on, you let this contract for 3 months, it's now gone on for 9 months. Why is that? So think about delivery, think about how you're going to do it, think about what is accepted, think about how you're going to exit those suppliers, work backwards, make sure your documentation is fit for that purpose. To your point earlier, John, if there's something that's happened before, can we not reuse it? Can we tweak it a bit? I'm up for reusing things all the time. And what's happened in government is, unfortunately, governments have reused things so many times that contracts and tender documentations for simple overarching categories like goods, works and services, let alone the subcategories of those, they share the documents throughout. Now, buying roads is different to buying photocopiers.
Yep.
So appropriate documentation and proportionate competition and proportionate documentation to what you're doing.
Well, gentlemen, we are incredibly approaching the end of our 30 minutes that we had allotted for this conversation. There is clearly an awful lot more that could and should be said about this. And I think one of the things I'm going to suggest is that we do a follow-up session on this, just to dig a little deeper into some of the application of some of those processes and tools that you've mentioned. In the meantime, though, I think what comes out of this, for me in particular, is this idea of starting, the last thing that you said, David, is start with the end in mind. What's the purpose of this? How are we going to achieve that? And what, therefore, do we need to do in order to make that happen? And then this idea of having in mind simplification. Let's simplify this process because that will take time and cost and complexity out of it. And the importance of getting people together, your point, Mirko, about co-locating people in order to co-create. I think that's really, really important. Gentlemen, that has been a very enlightening, I was going to say an enlightening discussion. It's an enlightening start to the discussion, and we definitely will do another session on this. I would like to thank you both, David Kershaw and Mirko Kleiner, clearly, I think, two of the thought leaders in the field of agile procurement. I'd like to thank you both very much indeed for your time. and to look forward to the next conversation that we have, which will be very shortly. Thank you very much indeed, both of you.